Dungeons and Dragons can get repetitive at times, and that's not because D&D is a boring game. I think it lies in the DMs and their inexperience. We need ways to keep our players invested, and in order to do that, we're going to have to make different kinds of scenarios for our players to interact with. So, join me, I'm your DM fan, and here are 7 ways to spice up your next D&D campaign. Our first spice to our D&D campaign is writing a murder mystery. Now, murder mysteries are really fun. They can add a different level of enjoyment for the players, especially players who don't have PC characters based in combat. These guys who play like bards or rogues or maybe different spellcasters. These guys can utilize their different utility spells or their different skill sets here, and it makes it for a more encompassing scenario. Or maybe you had a PC character die recently, and you could have the party collect and try and figure out who killed this player character, and that would be the whole murder mystery in itself, figuring out who killed your party member. Now, writing a murder mystery is a little bit of a different story. They're typically hard to write, especially when you have to deal with certain characters having the ability to just figure out the truth or talk to the dead. So the thing is, when you're writing a murder mystery, you might need to look at the characters you're writing it for. So make sure you take that into account if you were to throw this into your campaign. I could talk about murder mysteries and even how to go into writing one, but I'll leave that for another time. But let's move on to the next spice, shall we? The next dash of spice we're adding to our campaign is making sure our players are fighting the elements. And I'm not talking just the, actual elementals in D&D. I'm talking about the weather. We're talking storms, hurricanes, avalanches, volcanoes, floods, that kind of stuff. Make the characters feel like they're trapped. Maybe they're in a collapsing cave and they have to run outside. There's nothing they can really do in that scenario unless you have druids who can mold earth. But the thing is, that's where you get to see other characters shine. They get to use spells they don't normally get to use, or skills or weapons or different types of equipment that they have. The thing is, you have to make sure you're throwing everything at your players in order to make sure they're getting the most out of their characters. Some things of note when dealing with element encounters is watch out for flyers. They could completely ruin an entire scenario if you had like an avalanche or you had to climb a mountain or something like that, and they just fly right up. So make sure you might have some anti-fly zones or high gusts so they get bashed against the wall or something like that. Also, wizards are going to be a pain because they have some pretty great spells, including Dimension Door, which makes climbing or just moving about your environments really easy, so watch out for that as well. But for the most part, make sure your elements also are attacking your players. You don't want them to feel like they're not in a storm or in a rock slide or in a mudslide. You want to make sure they're actually feeling those effects, so do damage to them. Make it so they can maybe get away with a dex save, or they might be able to hold up a wall or a shield to block like incoming fire from maybe a forest fire or something like that. But make sure you're hitting them. Make sure they're feeling the effects of the environment around them. But other than that, environments and elemental scenarios are really interesting, really fun, and would definitely be a great addition to your next campaign. So the next thing I think would be really cool to add to a campaign is a Horde Battle. Now, Horde Battles are different than regular battles, as Horde Battles consist more about feeling like strong individuals. I would have multitudes of zombies or goblins or any sort of herd mentality creature completely attack a base or somewhere they had to defend, or they just were in a hall or in a tomb, and it's just a matter of keeping safe for the time being. Now, Horde Battles are different because all of the monsters will have one to 2 or maybe 5 HP max. And that makes it so when your players throw a bomb or they send a big fireball off, all of those monsters who get hit die. But after every round of play, after all the players have gone, all the monsters have gone, you replace all of those monsters that were just killed, and you keep stacking them. You just keep throwing them at your players, and you can start to see the, like, you know, sweat start to build on their foreheads as they keep going on round after round. They're losing spells, they're losing HP, they're losing ground. You start to see battle come alive in these horde battles. It's not about, you know, who gets the boss kill. It's about the fact that everyone made it to the end of this endeavor. So definitely throw horde battles in your campaign if you'd like. Alright, the next spice we're going to add is not necessarily a new type of spice that most people have seen, but it's a good one. But we might be able to work on it a little bit more. And that is vehicle combat. Now, vehicle combat is really cool in D&D, especially if you're able to get a map going, so your characters know exactly where they are on the vehicles that you're driving. Now, some vehicles that are some good vessels for you to use in your campaign. I don't know, depending on what, of course, what setting your campaign is in, but you could use boats. Boats are really good for pirate battles. There's plenty of boat stats online that you could use in your fights. Tanks. Sometimes you could explain away that the gnomes kind of got away with, or the dwarves got away with building tanks up. So you might be able to have tank battles, which is actually really fun. Tank battles are rad. Wagons or carriages, so maybe you're trying to race somewhere and you're getting attacked by a bunch of carriages, but they're like, don't stop, keep moving. So you got all these carriages running alongside each other, and you can shoot the wheels out and knock the carriages backwards, or maybe set the caravan on fire. Some other things are trains, like locomotives. That's a given. You see that in a lot of movies, so imagine doing that in D&D, but add some elements of magic or elements of D&D, so maybe the train is a mimic. That would be crazy. Like, could you imagine fighting a mimic train? Like, that'd be nuts. And also make sure that as you are doing this, it's not like a quick thing. Make it sometimes a whole session, maybe an entire campaign where you're on a vessel. The entire campaign you're on a train or you're in a tank, and this lifeboat of sorts in this world is your only saving grace. You got to make sure you're maintaining your vehicle so that the next time you guys get into battle, you know, you're good to go instead of in trouble because your pistons or your wheels are wobbly. So definitely try vehicle combat, and I hope that your next campaign has more wheels than the last. Alright, the next thing we're adding to our campaign is some IRL timed events. Now, IRL, of course, meaning in real life. So, normally in D&D, the rounds that we take only like in-game last seconds, not even minutes. So, what makes D&D really invigorating and really interesting sometimes is making those players feel like urgency is truly and honestly happening right in front of their eyes with a ticking clock. So pull out your phone or pull out a clock and put it in front of your players and say, you have X amount of time to get this done, go. And you see them panic. They grab their stuff, they start running around, they're like, okay, we gotta do this, we gotta do that, and it creates this really cool dynamic of teamwork between the players. Now, some IRL timed events you could try are combat, for one. Maybe you've got a big boss sitting in the way of a sinking temple, and you gotta kill this thing before you can escape, and it's just a matter of outputting as much possible damage as you can, so your players can get out alive. And then you put the clock in front of them, and you got 2 minutes to get out of this sinking temple. It's like, ah, shit! So yeah. Some other scenarios might be cool is maybe there's a war on the horizon. Maybe you've got like a certain amount of time before war breaks out, so Maybe it's a diplomatic meeting that needs to take place, so you got your diplomacy characters trying to negotiate some sort of peace treaty before this war erupts and thousands begin killing themselves. Also, the simple one that a lot of people use is puzzles, making sure that the players are able to figure out a puzzle before a certain time is up. That one is utilized quite a bit, so there's definitely a lot of different ways you could use puzzles in actual time-based scenarios. So, next time you've got a campaign, throw some fire under your players' butts when you bring out an actual clock and say, go. Alright, the next spice we're going to add is actually something I put in every single campaign regardless of where the setting is, and that is amusement parks and carnivals and festivals. Now, these events allow for some really fun, entertaining ways of utilizing Dungeons and Dragons mechanics. So say we're at a carnival and your players approach a game section. So you could play darts where they have to make dex checks and they win little prizes, but they have to pay gold every time they play these games. But maybe some games have like magical items that if they reach high scores, so you could have maybe tests of strength. So the barbarians could, you know, use those mallets and try and hit the bell and do strength checks, but you got to make that AC like really high depending on the level. So make sure you watch out for that. Yes, big thing. Watch out for your levels when you're making your carnivals and amusement parks, because if you make your your DCs too low, they're gonna take everything behind the counters. So watch out for that. Also, here are some examples of some games maybe you could put in your amusement park, like a dunk tank, which would be a dex check, a Hall of Mirror maze, so you just have the players deciding which direction they go, and you draw out a maze for yourself, and you monitor where they are on the maze. There's a human cannon event I had in one of my games where we shot people out of a cannon. They had to land inside of a target, so they could arc themselves using like acrobatics and stuff like that to try and get in a target. We also had people do like dance competitions and karaoke matches. Dance competitions are really fun. You get a bunch of dex characters, you know, rolling performance checks and dex saves and acrobatics checks, and it's a good time. So try that out. Try having a carnival or festival for your next session and throw a party for your players. I bet you a lot of them will enjoy it. Okay, the last bit of spice we have, but not forever, but only today, is endurance. Make your characters feel like the frickin' world hates them. Throw them in a desert, throw them on the ocean, make them suffer. And I'm sorry if that sounds evil, but that's you start to see some really cool things happening when your characters start feeling the actual threat of starvation set in. They have no food. Oh my gosh, like what do we start doing? Do we start fishing, or if we're in the ocean, or how are we gonna find any food if we're in the desert? Especially for lower level characters, definitely this is a better spice for a lower level crew. Higher level, they're not gonna have any troubles. I'm sorry, but they could just, I have a good berry. Good, or I summon familiar and I devour it. Like, so it really depends on your players, but endurance can be a really interesting scenario for you and your players. Focus on just getting through the day with your players. Talk about every single hour. Like maybe the first hour they wake up and they have to find food or water or shelter, and then as they progress through the day, maybe certain things happen, like they get bit by venomous insects, or vultures are now circling them. Or maybe if they're in a scenario like they're on a mountain and they have to climb for days in order to get to the top, you could have the weather start to set in, like our elements. Our elements definitely play a long and arduous task here when it comes to endurance-based scenarios. So you could have the rain weigh them down, tell them how heavy their clothes are getting from just getting soaked by the rain and trying to climb up these rocks, you know, inch by inch, foothold by foothold, but then make them do deck saves sometimes, like, oh, you slip and you begin to fall, you know, you try to grab on. Or in another endurance scenario, maybe they're just in prison. Maybe they just have to live through prison, because fantasy prison sucks. I don't know if you've been there, but it sucks. You have to scrounge for food, you might have to talk to prisoners, but definitely strip the characters of most of their belongings, abilities, and safety nets. You want to make sure that your characters are feeling vulnerable. Again, endurance can be utilized in a lot of different ways, and this will just be a tickle of the creative side, so maybe your next campaign has one of these really harsh scenarios in it. But with that, that's the last spice I have for you today. If you like this video, definitely give it a like and a share, and subscribe for more in the future. I've been your DM fan, and thanks for watching.